Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible, verse by verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in Genesis chapter 45. And this is one of the most, I think one of the things that's going to be revealed or stated, one of the most profound statements to me from a human perspective, okay, in the entire Bible. Now, the word godliness means a Godward attitude, a Godward perspective. In other words, a person who is godly is a person who always has a Godward view, attitude, or perspective. They see life, they see experiences, situations through how God sees them. And if you ever want to get over your bitterness, hatred, hard feelings, whatever, you have to see life through the perspective of God. And Joseph is going to give a phenomenal example of this. If we will remember, 20 years has passed, but 20 years previous, Joseph was sold into slavery by his evil brothers. They were evil. They were just horrible people. And for 13 years, he went through hardships that was not due to his own doing. In other words, sometimes we go through hardships because, let's just face it, we make dumb decisions. We make bad decisions, sinful decisions. But for 13 years, what Joseph went through, the treatment of his brothers, and then he becomes a slave in Egypt, and then he's falsely accused of rape, and that landed him in jail. And he did everything right. He prospered his slave master Potiphar's house. When in jail, he interpreted a dream that was forgotten about. Okay? So, and after all of that, he doesn't hold hatred or bitterness towards his brothers. That's profound. So, and the only way you could do that is to have a Godward, okay, a Godward perspective. So, when we kind of go into this chapter here, understand that we're, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. That dream has come to pass, where there would be 7 years of plenty of harvest, but then there would be 7 years of severe famine and drought. They are 2 years into this, and Joseph sends his sons to buy grain, but they don't realize that it's Joseph who's now Lord of the country. And Joseph takes them through several tests, right? I mean, you could say he really takes them through. And I think that one of the things that surprises even Joseph, even though Joseph remembers his dream, he says, yeah, they're going to bow down to me. But when Judah stepped up and said, I will be surety, I will be the guarantee. Okay? He says that to Jacob before they leave. Jacob was unwilling to let Benjamin go back with him because Joseph had said, if you don't bring Benjamin back, you're not going to be able to buy food. And Jacob was unwilling. And Reuben first said, hey, kill my 2 sons if you don't come back. Now that's worthless, right? But Joseph stepped up and said, I will be the guarantee. And he comes back, and they find Joseph's gold cup into Benjamin's bag of all. And so now Benjamin is facing, at least from their perspective now, get this in mind, from their perspective, Benjamin is facing a severe penalty, right? Jail, slavery. And Judah steps up and says, let me be the slave. Let me bear his penalty. That to me seemed to surprise Joseph. So let's bring up our thing here, and then because again, in that profound statement that he's getting ready to make, it's just going to be amazing. All right, let's go out. All right, let's bring it up here. All right, Genesis 45, verse 1. Now remember, Judah has just made his case. He said, let me stand in for Benjamin. Let me bear his penalty, even though they're not aware that Joseph set the whole thing up, that Benjamin is innocent. They don't know that, however. So verse 1 says, Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all of his attendants. So he called out, send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and also Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But they could not answer him because they were terrified in his presence. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Is my father still alive? Hey guys, and they're standing there in shock, like, what? Verse 4, then Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. And they came near. I am Joseph, your brother, he said, the one you sold into Egypt. Now, they could have just probably all killed over just from that statement right there, right? Yeah, I'm the one you sold into Egypt, right? I'm the one, right? You want to hear about all of my troubles? Look at verse 5, though. And now, don't be worried or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. And this is, again, phenomenal. Because why would he have this perspective? Well, because it's true. And the greater thing is that he realized, no doubt through God's revelation, that all of his hardships were for that end. Now let me just say this. We all should do the same. We may not be as grandiose as Joseph. Joseph had a specific plan and purpose. Yours may not ever achieve to that. And let me also say this. You may not ever know oftentimes what's behind the scenes to your hardships in life. But notice he said that we should always have a Godward attitude. Now, if you refuse that may, to me, reveal the sinful nature in you. That's even worse. Oftentimes people will say, why does God allow suffering? And let me just say this, regardless of, we can't answer that. Slavery in the Old Testament, for example, and we're going to come up on that when we get into the book of Exodus, right, and the book of Leviticus. The slavery laws here were kind of horrendous, that God allowed it and regulated it. And so people may say, well, I'm not going to serve God because he did that. Really? So what are your alternatives? He's still God. That's my point. So anyway, but this is what he says here, is that don't be angry, right? He's not bitter. There's no hatred, when he could have every right to be, because in each phase of that he was done wrong, unjust. He didn't even deserve it. One of the very few people who could say that the Bible even says that he did anything wrong. One of the very few people. And yet people totally misused him. But at the same time, he had this, you can almost say this recovery here, right? This blessing, the end certainly turned out to be better. Again, doesn't mean that everybody's going to be ruler of an entire nation, right? Or you're not going to be CEO of your company or some things like that. The greater thing is that, hey, whatever life dishes out, my perspective is always God. Okay? All right, so, but this is profound to me. I almost don't want to leave it because it is so profound. And this is, by the way, the definition of godliness. If I may say this, for some of you who are seeking marriage, and often my advice always is seek a godly person. You know, more than looks, more than money. Because a godly person is one who, even though we're not perfect, but they're going to view life through God's lens, and that's the definition of godliness. Verse 5 again, and now don't be worried or angry with yourself for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So God sent me here. And they're dumbfounded, of course. Another thing is, notice that even though Joseph is here, head of the state in Egypt, we're going to see this toward the end of his life, he's going to say, take my bones out of here. So keep that perspective. The perspective, again, is just awesome. Now, verse 9, return quickly to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your sheep, cattle, and all you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you, your household, and everything you have will become destitute. Look, your eyes and my brother Benjamin's eyes can see it. It is I. See, it is I, Joseph, who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all my glory in Egypt, and about all that you have seen, and bring my father here quickly. Then Joseph threw his arms around Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin wept on his shoulder. And Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept. And afterwards his brothers talked with him. Now again, this is amazing, since his brothers never treated him this way. They treated him with disdain. But 20 years had passed, and they kind of mellowed out, right? 20 years had passed, and so they kind of mellowed out here. All right. Verse 16. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace, Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his servants were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, tell your brothers, do this, load your animals and go back to the land of Canaan. Get your father and your families and come back to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you can eat from the richness of the land. You are also commanded to do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your young children and your wives, and bring, let me go back. Take your wagons from the land of Egypt for your young children and your wives, and bring your father here. Do not be concerned about your belongings, for the best of the land of Egypt is yours. Now, one kind of interesting thing here notice the gratitude that they have towards Joseph. That how Joseph has touched the land of Egypt. Now, of course, 400 years from now, it's going to be a totally different situation. Verse 21, the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave each of his brothers changes of clothes, but he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of silver for 5 changes of clothes. And he sent his father the following: 10 donkeys carrying the best products of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys carrying grain, food, and provisions for their fathers on the journey. So Joseph sent his brother on their way, and as they were leaving, he said to them, "Don't argue." Don't argue on the way. Maybe he feels things, just in case, they might not have changed all the way, right? But don't argue. Now, this is amazing because I want you to keep this in mind. If anyone who should have been bitter, right? If anyone who should have been bitter, shouldn't it have been Joseph? But he's telling them, hey, rest in God. Now, they could be blaming, like Reuben could have blamed the rest of them. I told y'all, they already had the argument. And by the way, he's already heard them have the argument, started blaming one another. Didn't we tell you? Oh, man, He wants them to focus on the goodness of God. That's the key there. He wants them to focus on the goodness of God. Not their past, but the goodness of God. All right. Verse 25. So they went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. Now, there was a great big entourage. Camels, donkeys, food. So that's important to understand, because then he said, verse 26. They said, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. Jacob was stunned, for he did not believe them. But when they told Jacob and all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father was revived. And Israel said, enough, my son, Joseph is still alive. I will go see him before I die. So, on a kind of another note too, I kind of help but wondering that you look at all the deceiving Jacob did, and look at all, the deception that kind of came to him, But again, keep this in mind that God, right? That God, nevertheless, looked out. And this was a great kind of a lesson for us. I mean, there's, to me, a lot of angles to look at this. From God's perspective, God preserved the people, kept his promise with Abraham to keep the seed. From Joseph, he's used mightily, right? He's used mightily by God to preserve the very people that destroyed him, that sought to destroy him. But from his brothers, think about this, from his brothers, we see the goodness and the mercy of God despite how evil and bad and horrible they were. And I think this is what Joseph was trying to get them to see. That forget your past. Yeah, you guys were horrible. And I don't think we should ever cease from telling the truth or speaking the truth. They were. You guys did evil. But in spite of that, God looked out for you. And God is using me, the one that you despise, to very save you. But you need to understand it was God who did that. It was God who preserved you. It was the goodness and mercy of God. The symbolic thing here is that Joseph becomes a symbol of Christ. That despite all of the evil, that God was good to us through the person. That God was good to them through the person of Joseph. God is good to us through the person of Jesus Christ. That is extremely important. All right, guys. See you in the next study. All right. See you then.